now we look at the work of another time traveller. Let's go first to a small American town. A young boy meets an old man, a performer in a circus sideshow. His whole body is covered in tattoos, but what makes him special is that if you look closely at those tattoos, they begin to move, acting out the future. He is the illustrated man and his creator, Ray Bradbury, whose mind may be in the future, but whose soul is always back there somewhere in the small-town America of his childhood.
When I was a boy of 14, Mr. Electrico in a carnival told me to live forever. He charged me with electricity, and he sort of jumped me into the main conduit of life, and by saying, you know, live forever. And I thought that over a period of time, and I realized in later life that by writing well, you have a chance to maybe not live forever. But how about living 10 years after you die, or 20 years if you're lucky, or if you're extraordinarily lucky, 50 or 100 years? That's the most you can ask. And then beyond that, maybe you might live as a footnote, or maybe one story will be around. So if I can have that sort of temporary thing for a few years, and my daughters stick around, and then we make it out into space on our rockets, then the whole race goes there, and we have true immortality, don't we?
Bradbury is the author of more than 400 stories, many of which have just been reprinted by Granada, along with several of his novels. Bradbury's world is a very fragile one. A man cutting a wheat field suddenly and terrifyingly realizes that he is literally the Grim Reaper, and that every stalk he cuts is a human life. And yet for all this, Ray Bradbury is perhaps best viewed not as a science fiction writer, a point confirmed by the critic Brian Sibley.
Yes, I think he's been wrongly pigeonholed in that genre. He writes most of all about people. That's why he's not a science fiction writer. He doesn't write about the nuts and bolts of how to get to Mars or beyond. He talks about the people that go there, and it doesn't matter whether they're on the red planet or whether they're in a small Midwest American town. They're real people that he's concerned with. He prizes open their skulls. He lifts the carapace, and out jack in the box all sorts of things. There are hopes and fears, dreams, nightmares, joys, despairs, births and deaths. Or, in one of the most marvellous stories of all, a time traveller who goes back 60 million years for the most terrifying big game hunt ever.
The jungle was wide and full of twitterings, rustlings, murmurs, and sighs. Suddenly it all ceased, as if someone had shut a door. Silence, the sound of thunder. Out of the mist, 100 yards away, came Tyrannosaurus Rex. It came on great, oiled, resilient, striding legs. It towered 30 feet above half of the trees, a great evil god folding its delicate watchmaker's claws close to its oily reptilian chest. Each lower leg was a piston, 1,000 pounds of white bone, sunk in thick ropes of muscle, sheathed over in a gleam of pebbled skin like the mail of a terrible warrior.
And in that story, called A Sound of Thunder, Bradbury really turns the whole idea of time travel on its head, because the time traveller steps off the path that he's supposed to be following and treads on a butterfly, a prehistoric butterfly. When he gets back to his own time, he finds he's changed the whole course of human history. And you see, dinosaurs are just one of the images Bradbury uses, one of the recurrent motifs in his work. There are carnivals, there are masks, there are movie monsters, there's Buck Rogers spacemen. And most of all, of course, there are the sort of seasons of humanity. It seems to me that Bradbury is especially interested in spring and autumn people, the child and the old man, which perhaps is exactly the things that most fascinate children, you know, themselves and the very old.
It was a wilderness town. You couldn't go more than 2 blocks in any direction before you plunged into this ravine. And that was great fun in the autumn and in the winter and the spring and summer. So I ran free there. It was a free spirit. I was Tarzan in the trees, or I was ice skating or sledding, tobogganing. When I was 6 years old, I saw the Lost World. And then when I was 13, King Kong came into the world and fell on me. And then when I was 17, I met Ray Harryhausen, and we both discovered we were in love with dinosaurs. So out of that love, we built a life.
There's an odd combination in his work, though, isn't there? On the one hand, he's very much a formula writer, and the stories tend to end with a kind of O. Henry twist to them. On the other hand, there is a remarkably lyrical strain in his work. I can still remember, as an adolescent, picking up the first Bradbury book I had, which was The Golden Apples of the Sun, and discovering for the first time that prose really could read like poetry.
Yes, exactly. He uses marvellous phrases. He talks about old women embroidering and says that the needles swarmed like a tiny school of metal fish. Uncle Liner, the great winged man, in one of the series of stories that Bradbury wrote, he describes as falling out of the wide blue yonder with the sound of a large telephone directory being dropped out of the sky. Well, I've never heard a telephone directory dropped out of the sky, but if I heard it, I know it would sound like Uncle Liner. And as you rightly say, all that is then very firmly rooted in this small Midwest American town, which is, of course, also the basis for his two novels, Something Wicked This Way Comes and Dandelion Wine. Something wicked with the small town being invaded by this sinister, demonic carnival with its carousel that runs backwards and its mirror maze that's full of so many reflections that you could drown in it. And Dandelion Wine, which, as Bradbury says, a name which sounds like summer on the tongue, in which Douglas Spaulding, the boy who was Bradbury himself, and Bradbury's middle name is Douglas, where Douglas Spaulding leaps down the sidewalks in his cream sponge para-lightfoot tennis shoes like menthol on the feet, says the advertisement, in search of discoveries, revelations, illuminations, intuitions, unravelling the world like the contents of a golf ball, he says, in a time when the breathing of the world was long and warm and slow.
Brian Sibley was talking about Ray Bradbury, much of whose work has just been reprinted in paperback by Granada. The film version of Something Wicked This Way Comes will be coming this way later in the year. And if you're of a sentimental turn of mind, let me recommend a special favourite of mine, Dandelion Wine. This recreates the sometimes mysterious, sometimes frightening world of a 12-year-old boy in the summer in which he discovers not only that other people die, but that one day he will too. But since this is Ray Bradbury, far from depressing him, it makes him determined to live life to the full. In many ways, as Brian Sibley says, that boy was Ray Bradbury, and his energy and his confidence in life have never left him.
So I'm going to change the future, by God.